which ultimately, Mr. Chair, is the reason why I think we should call this the final death of public broadcasting in New Zealand.
Young.
Be now put.
Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good looks always win. I joke. Mr. Chairman, actions speak louder than words, and with this bill, the national-led government shows its stripes really when it comes to public broadcasting. Not only do they remove in this bill the Charter, which was one of the attempts by the prior government to maintain at least a modicum of public broadcast ethic within Television New Zealand, and I for one, don't think we succeeded totally in that task, and I don't think you've heard anyone from this side say that we had it completely right with Television New Zealand. But removing the Charter is going in the wrong direction, and it's part of the intent of this government to strip Television New Zealand of its public good broadcasting functions. And I think we should also at this time reflect on other steps that the government's taken in that regard. This bill and their actions under it is consistent with what they've done with Television 7. Now, I'm aware that there was a proposal from Television New Zealand to extend the funding of public broadcasting by keeping TV7 running, which was producing a good number of the public interest broadcasts that were being produced by or for Television New Zealand and put on free-to-air through Television 7. There were suggestions, I think, at different times that Television 7, perhaps together with Radio New Zealand, could provide the basis for some good quality free-to-air broadcasting in New Zealand. As my colleague Charles Chevelle just said to me as we were chatting before I spoke, he said that it's important that we have a public broadcaster in New Zealand that maintains a modicum of good quality, intelligent broadcasting in New Zealand. And I agree with that. The trend is for ever more reality TV shows, ever more imported content, ever more pushing boundaries as to violence and sexual content as they compete for market share, and the dumbing down of what we feed New Zealanders, and through that the diminution, I think it has an effect on the diminution of the standard of discourse that we actually have in society. So I think that broadcast television is in a poor state and getting worse under this government, and this bill is merely part of that decline. Mr. Chairman, it saddens me that we come to these clauses 1, 2 and 3 which amend the Television New Zealand legislation through the Television New Zealand Amendment Bill, because it does signal a slide towards mediocrity, a slide towards more substandard TV, more of the same being produced on all of our television channels. And that's not to say that commercial television doesn't have a place. It most clearly does, and increasingly a dominant place in New Zealand. But there is a state of change in the television industry. We hear reports that Can West, the owner of the TV3 network, and some other radio organisations, is in trouble because it paid too much, and there was Radio Live. There was an overseas buyout where private equity bought into those institutions, paid far too much money. They are carrying very high levels of debt. They were in such difficulty that the government had to give them a loan in respect of their frequency fees last year.
It's still not going to save them.
And rumour has it that it's still not going to save them, and that part of the public broadcasting...
government's bailing out the private sector.
Well, it is interesting that they did give support to the private sector there in a way, and yet they wouldn't support Television 7 when it required some assistance.
Or Hillside.
Now, we heard from the other side that it ran out of money. Yes, well, it's true that their funding lines were for 3 years when they were originally set up, but of course most budget lines are for a limited period of years, and it was for the government to decide whether they thought there was sufficient priority in this.
Great channel, TV7.
TV7 was very cost effective. I think that the proposals that came forward from Television New Zealand, that I understand were actually supported by some of the ministers in the current government, but that Mr Joyce intervened to kill, Mr Chairman.
David Parker.
Very good call, Mr Chairman.
Mr Joyce intervened to ensure did not proceed, which I think was a sadness for New Zealand. It just took a bit of vision there. I think Television New Zealand actually were, under the Charter, trying to do the right thing through TV7, and it was probably the greatest innovation in public broadcasting in the last few years. And I think that the proposals that were brought forward by Television New Zealand to continue that part of free-to-air public broadcasting were worthy of support, and I'm saddened that they weren't supported by the government. But I'm not surprised when I read this bill, because, of course, this bill again removes, as has been said, removes the Charter. It is at times depressing in this House to be so often have to be negative about the legislative agenda of the government, because most opposition members, indeed all opposition members, we're not in our DNA negative people.
We're not. We're very positive people.
We would much rather be talking about positive things, but sadly it is the role of the opposition to point out mistakes by the government, and this is one of them. And so, Mr Speaker, when I rise to speak in respect of this, I can't really say much more than actually I thought the Green Party in their minority report from Select Committee said it well in the first sentence. They opposed the TVNZ Amendment Bill because it strips Television New Zealand of its charter and its public service obligations and responsibilities. And that, essentially, is what this bill does. And that's why we oppose it. We've said that in our own words, as prior speakers have said, but Mr Speaker, it saddens me that we've not only seen the demise of, or are seeing the demise of TV7, we're seeing the charter being stripped away from Television New Zealand. We're going to see more and more low-quality sort of reality TV shows, which I don't really think add much to the to society. And yes, they have. We'll see more and more people being those that can afford to subscribing for Sky to have some good programs which are at times shown on Sky, but which aren't readily available to most New Zealanders because they don't or can't afford to subscribe to Sky or choose to prioritise other things, and where they are left with reliance on Television New Zealand. And unfortunately what they get fed through Television New Zealand has over the decades become more populist, more chasing ratings rather than delivering programs that would perhaps add to society. So we're seeing less current affairs, we're seeing less documentaries, we're seeing fewer documentaries, I should say, fewer documentaries, fewer quality political shows. The political shows that there are now are on Sunday mornings. They're not in the prime slots that we used to see in yesteryear when there were good analysis of government policy, and I can understand why the government doesn't want that, because their policies don't withstand scrutiny, and they would not want the public to understand how New Zealand is going backward under their watch. So, Mr Chairman, I'm sad that this bill will be passed tonight by the national majority with support from either ACT or the Maori Party, and I think that that's probably about all I will say.
Jamie Lee Ross.